Okay. All right. Okay, well, it's 10:30. Let's go ahead and get started. Good morning. Happy Friday. Happy Friday. Everyone on Zoom, do you see my presentation?
Yes.
You can. Thank you, Rosie. Appreciate it. Okay, just want to make sure because I know here in the training room we definitely see it. Okay, so let's dive. So what is negotiating real estate repair requests, right? The whole essence of what we do as real estate professionals is the ins and outs, right? It doesn't really matter who you represent. If you represent the buyer or represent the seller, this is where we see most transactions fall apart, is during this process here, right? Now, remember, there's negotiations in the very beginning as we're trying to get our offer accepted, right? And then ultimately into escrow. Then once we're in escrow, we have a responsibility and the buyer has their due diligence period to do any and all inspections regarding the condition of the property. And it doesn't really matter if it's a home that's 100 years old, or if it's a brand new development, new construction home, the buyer still has the ability to do any and all inspections. That includes general inspections, okay? That includes um, roof inspections, electrical, plumbing, foundation, anything. That's the beauty of the dynamics of what we do in real estate is it's like buying a used vehicle, right? You want to make sure that the vehicle's intact, right? Do a little bit of research, check the engine, take it for a test drive, kick the tires, make sure that the transmission is working, maybe rev it up and here. Maybe just check everything, right? And underneath the engine as well too to make sure that there's no leaks whatsoever. Well, real estate is that same element, folks, okay? Is, one, you're not going to do it as a licensed agent. Your clients are not going to do it, but you hire professionals that do a lot of these inspections. Does that make sense? Okay. So let's go ahead and dive into the importance of what we uh and how we navigate, requests of repairs. So give me 1 minute here while we see who's we got a couple more people jumping on the call, so bear with me. Here we go. All right. Okay. Thanks, Austin, for making sure. Just it's never uncertain if the presentation is on Zoom. Okay, let me just admit a couple more people on to the presentation. All right, so let's go on. So what is the R on the RR and the RRRR? So the RR is,
Response on bias.
okay. Please make sure to mute yourself. 1 second. Let me do that. Okay, so please make sure you mute yourself. Okay, going back to the presentation. So what is RR? Please make sure to mute yourself. 1 second. Okay, here we go. So the RR request for repairs form, the RRRR is the seller's response to the buyer's reply to the request for repairs. These are forms that are facilitated for the purpose of negotiating terms. Okay. So the buyer requests repair using the form RR, right? So when you're representing the buyer, as an example, part of the process, once you get your offer accepted, that's a good feeling, right? We're opening escrow. Now it's the timelines, right? If it's a 30-day escrow, well, these are the timelines that we must do in order to facilitate our position and to navigate this to the finish line, right? Well, part of it is the request of repairs, which is a contingency. And that contingency is typically a default of 17 days. So the buyer has 17 days to do any and all inspections regarding the overall condition of the property. Okay. Once that 17 days expires, the buyer has the option to cancel escrow or to release that as a condition and continue moving through the process. Does that make sense? Now, remember, this is part of the negotiation. Doesn't necessarily mean that the seller has to take care of any of the buyer's requests. All properties are sold in as is condition, meaning that the seller doesn't even have to acknowledge the buyer's request. Now, in good faith, it should be something that the seller, because this is again, as I mentioned earlier, this is where we see most deals fall apart, is during this period. Okay. Our job is to ensure and help navigate this for the buyer, because let's just say that the buyer is a brand new first time home buyer, right? And they do all these inspections, and these inspections are going to come back with some conditions, some issues. It's our job to really sit down with them, explain, right? It could be as something very minor, or it can be something significant, right? That's going to cost a lot of money. If the house is tilting on a raised foundation, right? A lot of people may be concerned with that, right? But someone that knows the ins and outs, or maybe is a contractor, knows that it's not that big of a deal, depending on the circumstances, right? But it's the little things too, like cracked windows, right? Crack on the drywall, maybe cracks on the wall. Just as you can see here for the people that are in the training room, you can see all kinds of stress cracks, right? Does this mean that it's a big issue? No. We live in an area that there's always going to be movement, right? We have a lot of earthquakes. So once you understand those particular elements and how to maneuver and navigate it, the concern here is, how do you continue with the process, right? How do you convince the buyer that you know part of this process is we can ask the seller to do certain things, and the seller has three options here, right? Those three options is they do the repairs. In lieu of the repairs, number two, they give you credit for those repairs, or they do a price reduction, right? Maybe a price reduction may be best because the buyer may be more happy to go through that process of getting a lower price, right? So those are three of the elements and positions that a buyer can request a seller to do. Now, the seller can also say, nope, I'm not going to do any. Property's being sold in as is condition. Therefore, take it for what it is. If you want it, great. If you don't, then this is your opportunity to also back out of the deal. And under this circumstances, the buyer can exercise their position under paragraph 14B of the purchase agreement that allows them to exercise the right to cancel and retain their full deposit back. Okay. So buyers request the repairs using is a list of repairs too long on zip forms will automatically attach a overflow addendum. What that means is if you put a lot of stuff that the buyer's requesting the seller to do, right? Don't worry. It'll give you a supplement addendum attached to it that allows the seller to see all of the buyer's requests. Even though that the RR, if you know the form, it only has so many lines to add so much things. You can always attach a separate addendum to it as well, or just keep going through the motions of the request of repairs, and it'll automatically include that supplement as well. Now, you can also request termite repairs to be requested upon as already conducted as part of the condition, right? Back then, and I'm talking about maybe 10, even maybe 12 years ago, the purchase agreement had it already automatically that the termite section 1 and section 2 was part of the negotiations. Well, they have removed all that, with a new purchase agreement. Now that is now considered part of the request of repairs. So under the form, it allows you to do all of the inspections and also termite inspection, sewer inspection, roof inspection, electrical, anything and all, right? There's actually a form that allows you and your buyer to actually see what other inspections you can do regarding the overall condition of the property. Maybe the home is 100 years old, has a basement, and maybe the basement has the furnace, a water heater that has been there for years and years and years. Some of the concern is asbestos. Some of the concern is lead base, right? So they can do additional inspections regarding these type of conditions to make sure that the buyer is happy with the property, or if they're willing to negotiate some terms, right? Now, this is, again, as I mentioned earlier, this is where we see most deals fall apart because the buyer feels overwhelmed with so many things and so many issues regarding the property. Now, our job as real estate professionals is to navigate that, right? And to put some sense into it. Now, our job is not to tell them buy it. Our job is to educate. They have to make the ultimate decision in how they want to maneuver this, if that makes sense. Okay. Let's see, 1 second. I think we have a couple more people on the call. Let me jump. All right. Also used to request credit or price reduction in lieu of repairs. Credit must be disclosed to the lender. Total credit may not exceed lender's allowance credit. Okay, so let me give you some perspective because I get this question quite often. Okay, let's say that a buyer qualifies for 850,000, right? They're putting 20% down. Okay. Their loan amount is, I don't know, 650,000 as an example, right? Now the buyer gets their offer accepted, you're in the trenches of your due diligence period, and now your job is to start making calls to home inspection companies. Now, we should all have at least a minimum a home inspection, a general home inspection done on the property. Because the general home inspection company will do most of the heavy lifting if they see some concerns with the property. And then from there, now we can get the experts if it's an issue with the roof, if it's an issue with electrical, right? Then we can now source it out to other professionals that only focuses on those specific. Does that make sense? All right. But let's just say that you're in the trenches now and you're about to prepare the request of repairs, right? But the buyer's asking for all of these repairs, right? And now you kind of bullet point this, and it's going to be, say, $15,000 that the buyer's requesting. Well, knowing that the lender will only allow a certain amount of credit and concessions, you're going to communicate with the lender and find out, well, how much of this money can I use, if all, right? And let's say that some of that money can only be used for the concessions or credit towards the buyer's obligation on the loan. And let's say that $10,000 is the only maximum amount that they can use as part of the process of the lender, right? Well, that gives us still a $5,000 discrepancy, right, or difference. How do you maneuver that conversation? Because if the seller agreed to give you 15,000, but the lender is only telling you can only use 10,000 of that 5,000, how do you utilize the rest of the money so you don't lose it? Because if you don't take it, what happens is it goes back to the seller. So you got to maximize the angle in how you maneuver this conversation. So the three options that I told you earlier, right, which is fix the issue, credit in lieu of the repairs, or do a price reduction. So let's just say that the buyer submitted that request for $15,000, right? And then the buyer now still has that $5,000. Well, you can use it for a buy down as an example. So we can use that additional $5,000 to buy down the rate. And that might work too. Or you can say, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, we're going to use $10,000, okay, towards the credit, plus the $5,000 towards a buy down or a price reduction. So let's just say that you submitted an offer for 850, And now you still have that lingering $5,000 because we cannot use it towards buyer's credit, right? Or closing costs. You can ask as part of the 3 process to do a price reduction of $5,000. Now, it's not going to really make a big dent into the monthly payment, but it's still substantial when it comes to taxes, right? Anything that you get as a reduction definitely helps towards that. Does that make sense? Any questions on that? So remember, you can utilize all of the concessions, but if you know how to maneuver that, right? Part of it can go to closing cost, part of it can go into buy down the rate, part of it can be towards reducing the purchase price, and part of it can be instead of giving us the concessions or credit, why don't you do the repairs, right? Maybe replacing the the water heater as an example, right? And that water heater may be $1,000, right? So that's part of the concession because now you're getting a brand new water heater. Does that make sense? Questions, thoughts, or concerns? Okay. Let me omit a couple people more. All right, so Rosie, let's see here. Can 5,000 go to reduce the price? Absolutely, Miguel. Yes, as I mentioned, 5,000 can be used towards reduction of the purchase price. Rosie says lender usually allows up to 3% of the sale price. It is better to ask the lender to determine the maximum amount that the lender allows. Absolutely. So here's the thing, when you come from a good understanding of how is the concessions and credits, remember, you need to be in communications with the lender, okay? Part of it is talk to the lender and see what is allowed and not allowed. Remember, you're trying to navigate this to make it a win for the buyer, right? As part of the negotiations. Now, you're going to look like a hero to your clients when you're able to negotiate whatever amount, either fixed, credit, price reduction, buy down of the rate as part of the process, right? And imagine if you were able to get this because the seller, one, doesn't want to cancel, right? They'll help through that process. Remember, as I said earlier, this is where we see most deals fall apart, right? So in essence, this is your upper advantage here too, because your strategy is, well, the seller may not want to give us $20,000 or $15,000 worth of credit and concessions, okay? And that could happen. That can happen. But what if the seller does give you all those concessions, right? That's the beautiful thing about negotiations. Remember, it has to also be realistic, okay? And I've seen some really interesting offers and interesting requests of repairs. It has to be reasonable. And what is reasonable, right? I don't know. But if a property is 850,000 and the property has just been on the market for 5 days and you were the lucky offer that got accepted, and now you're going through your due diligence and doing all of these inspections, right? And now the buyer is asking for a ridiculous amount of $100,000. Do you think that the seller may take that? Why? Why do you think that? Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's so many variables regarding that, right? Now, as a buyer's agent, I'm going to look at my buyers and realize, like, are you really kidding me? You know, I was having a conversation with an agent yesterday, and this agent was saying, well, I know that the property just came on the market. I want to make an offer, but I want to reduce it $125,000 from what the asking price is. And I immediately told her, it's only on the market 2 to 3 days. Have you did your due diligence? Did you talk to the listing agent, ask if the listing agent had any other offers? And she says, yeah, there was other offers on it. And are you sure you want to submit an offer less than what the asking price? She goes, yeah. I says, okay. Well, I'm going to tell you 3 things can happen, right? The seller may accept it, congrats. The seller may counter, congrats, or the seller may reject it, congrats, right? Because all of those can happen, right? Now, in my opinion, I think the offer is going to get rejected, right? It's just a freshly new listing. And if there's multiple offers, where does that stand? Either they're going to see that this buyer is not realistic, not serious, or they're just trying to lowball, right? Put yourself in that position. If you were the listing agent or if you were the seller, right? And you see an offer less than what you put the property on the market, how would you feel? Would you take it personal? Would you be upset? Or will you use this as a negotiation to see maybe they're just trying to test the water to see how much we can get out of it, right? I don't take it personal. You throw any offer at me, I'm going to see it and I'm going to try to utilize how do I squeeze all of the lemon out of this buyer? And I'm going to use that as an advantage, regardless of how low. Because what happens is a lot of agents and sellers will get pissed off. Why would they send me an offer that low, right? Are they serious? Are they really motivated to buy? Or are they just trying to get a good deal, right? Now, if you get your emotions into it, you lose. Remember, that's right. Yeah. This is all part of negotiations. Take your emotions out of the way, folks. And the essence of the chaos, right? This is where most of the deals, you either make it work or you don't. You got to think outside the box. And when you think outside the box, then you find a solution. Remember, our job is to help the buyer, the seller get to what? The end goal, right? To get the deal close. But in essence, you can be in the chaos of that issue and you can also kill the deal. Because I've seen agents kill their own deals because they're not using practical scenarios to explain it in a way to help their buyers and educate the client in how to maneuver this. You throw me a lowball offer, I will thank you for it because it's an offer. Okay. I don't take the attitude is why would you send me a lowball offer, right? You're disrespecting the client. So many scenarios people talk about it. To me, it's like, look, I got an offer, whatever I have to work it, right? That's the way you have to have that mentality. Just because it's a lot less than what you had it listed for doesn't matter to me. My job is thinking, okay, how do I get this buyer and buyer agent to see how much I can get them up, right? And then once I know their maximum, then I can either say, okay, he's out, she's out, they're out. Or what if this buyer is the ultimate buyer that we go into a contract because they just wanted to test it, but they really truly want this property and I get them where the buyer and the seller come to an agreement. That's the strategy. That's the way you maneuver this. Do not take it personal, folks. Okay.
Sometimes it's good to have an offer because then at least you have multiple offers so you can negotiate with whatever offer is coming up.
100%. Absolutely. Sorry, the net very bad. I'm sorry. Not sure what she means by that. Question? Yes, sir. Typically the seller will pay for termite completion. The buyer will put the request, the termite will be done by the buyer. Usually the request is done as part of the buyer's due diligence, home inspections, termite inspections is done by the buyer. But once they get the report and there's findings on that report, then part of it is the buyer requesting the seller to take care of the completion of usually which is section 1 of the termite. Okay. Your average can be varies depending on the square footage. If the house needs to be fumigated and tented, and ultimately does it have a detached or attached garage? Does it have an ADU? So there's many variables in cost. This is why I recommend to at least get 3 different estimates, or at least a minimum of 2 different estimates of, for them to go out there and check. Because if that's something that the buyer's wanting and it's one of their commitments that they want as part of the process, then, you know, you want to make sure that you get the fair, or maybe you've been working with a good termite company as well that have reasonable, costs as well. The seller usually would pay for it as part of the process. So it's like a VA loan. Okay, VA loans now either can pay, but back in the day, VA loan was only paid by the seller. It was not a charge to the buyer. But times have changed. Now either party can pay for the termite completion. What's the question? As is? Okay. Yeah. That's the beauty, and I don't know if I can consider beauty, but the beauty of it is that all properties are sold in as is condition. So if you're the listing agent, right, you don't have to on the counter offer put that the property is being sold in as is condition. On the contract, it already stipulates that information that the property is, sold in as is condition. Why agents put it, I don't know, but they do, okay? It's already on the contract. There's no need to do so. But they do it to maybe reinsure the buyer that, hey, don't even bother asking. Now, let me ask you this scenario, okay? Because this comes across quite often. If you know that the property is being sold in as is condition, right? Meaning that the seller's not gonna not do any concessions, any repairs, any credit or price reduction, right? Does that mean that the buyer cannot do their inspections? Is that a yes or a no? No, right? Yeah, that means they can do any and all inspections. What it means is that the seller will not entertain any requests from the buyer. Does that make sense? Yes? Okay. Now, any savvy real estate agent, okay, will not care. If I'm representing the buyer and the listing agent sends a counter offer, and on that counter offer in bold cap says property is being sold in its as is condition. Do not ask for any credit or any repairs. Okay. And then I go and do all of these inspections, and the buyer's concerned with certain things, right? Do you think that I will not put a request for repairs if my clients are concerned? Because I know that the seller has stated that they won't do any repairs.
You can
Remember,
still ask for it.
yeah, so think about it from this angle. Remember, you have a fiduciary responsibility to who? To your buyer, absolutely. Not to the seller, not to the listing agent, right? But to the buyer. So in essence is I can care less of what the listing agent and the seller stated earlier as part of my negotiations. I'm glad that, and I'm grateful that I got my offer accepted. I'm in. Now the only way I'm out is if I decide to cancel and the seller decides to cancel, because it has to be mutually agreed upon, right? So once I'm in, it's going to be hard for the seller to cancel. I'm already in. So my job now is to take care of my buyer's best interest. So in theory, right, I'm going to do my very best, regardless of what the listing agent sent me on as part of the original counteroffer. Yeah, the listing agent may get pissed off, right? Because I sent out a request. But this is where you angle yourself and you position yourself, right? And you're going to have dialogue and conversation. Before I send it out, I'm going to call the listing agent. I'm going to send an email explaining the reason behind it. Remember, the beauty of what we do, ladies and gentlemen, is negotiations. That's the dynamics of what we have, right? It can go left, it can go right, or it can go straight, right? Just because it's in black and white doesn't necessarily means it's going to go black and white. That's the beautiful thing of what we call negotiations. And part of it is request of repairs. So in essence, for me, I'm gonna still submit it. Because it's a gamble, just like playing blackjack, right? Playing that poker face. Yeah, I'll probably get a nasty email or probably a call, probably a text. Stay calm and collect. Okay. And you're going to explain to the listing agent, listen, I'm only doing what's best for my clients. My clients are telling me and instructing me, so I have to do what I was hired to do. If they're asking me, regardless of what they signed prior, I'm going to do so. Now it's your job, Mr. or Mrs. Listing Agent, to present this. Okay. I need you to present it. But do you really want to start over again? You got a buyer that wants this property, is only asking for certain things to be taken care of. But do you really truly want to start over with no guarantee that the next buyer will offer what we offer? No guarantee that they're not going to ask for any type of repair or request, and no guarantee that you'll close the deal. So you're already in with us. Make it work. Make it work. That's how I would approach it. Does that make sense? Okay. Seller, give seller copies of reports with request seller to share with future buyer. Okay, so part of the process too is, the beauty is, and investors are notorious for stuff like this, okay? And I'll explain why, okay? So what I mean is they'll do all of these inspections and get their contractors out there, and now they're trying to hustle the seller for a price reduction, right? They went in at $1 million, but they said it's $150 worth of stuff and we want a price reduction. And that's okay. You know, I'm gonna chuckle and laugh at it, but again, that's okay. You know, that's their strategy and their angle. Do not get involved in the chaos and fall under this rabbit hole thinking that you're going to be pissed off when you know that the property is being sold in its as-is condition. This is why today's lecture and class is about tactics. Take your emotions out of the way, folks. Stick to the facts and get the job done. Okay? Get the job done. Your job is to maneuver this and get it to the finish line so all of us get paid, right? The listing agent, the buyer's agent, the buyer gets the home, the seller sells the home, escrow gets paid, title gets paid, everyone gets paid, right? But this is the vital tipping point here that you can either make it or break it. It's your choice. But you educate your clients in how to maneuver this and explain it. Okay. So if an offer comes in and a request is less than, the request to repair is $150,000 as part of their negotiation, I'll present it to the seller. Okay. And then the seller has to make an ultimate decision. Remember, we don't know the seller's position. They may be in an urgent to sell this property because they got to get out of California because the seller is relocating to the state of Michigan, or excuse me, Florida or New York or wherever, right? We don't know their urgency. And they may just say, look, I just went out of California. Let's make this work. Okay. Maybe they're not okay allowing a price reduction of 150,000, but they'll do 75,000 price reduction. That's a win because you were able to bend the seller from what was originally seller not wanting as part of the, condition. Property sold in as is. Okay. Just because they say no in the very beginning doesn't necessarily mean no in the middle of the transaction. Does that make sense? Right? There's always room for negotiations. That's the awesome and the dynamics of what we do. So part of it is, if the buyer has done all of these inspections and you're requesting, right? You're requesting any of these repairs, credit, or price reduction, your job is to provide all of those reports. Because I'm not going to take face value your request of repairs without validation of what you believe you need a price reduction, a credit, or any of these items repaired. Show me proof. Okay. and then we can go through the motion. Does that make sense? Yeah. Mhm. Yeah.
You have to show them the other two.
So not necessarily. So if you represent the buyer and the buyer does 2 termite inspections, right? Most, and it's like anything, it's like an appraisal, they're gonna give you different evaluations, right? Not all are gonna have the same value, right? And let's say you get 2 different termite inspections, right? And out of those 2 termite inspections, there's big differences, right? One is gonna, one is gonna be, say, $5,000, the other one is saying $6,200, right? But most of the stuff is kind of similar on the termite report, right? Well, pros and cons is if I'm the buyer and I'm the buyer's agent, right? My number one goal is to get the work done, right? And if their reports are similar, I'll probably go with the less one than go with the high one, right? Because now we can also compare and say, look, calling the termite company, listen, thank you so much for doing the inspection report. The buyers ended up getting a second termite inspection. There was a couple findings here that you and this inspection didn't have. The buyers are willing to go with you, but if you can incorporate these additional findings into the report, they'll say, well, give me the copy of that report and let me take a look. And then you send that report to the termite company, not a problem. We can get that taken care of as well. Okay, so they'll add the additional. It may cost you a little bit more, but it still may be less than that $6,200. Does that make sense? So it all depends on how you maneuver this. But back to your question, right? You don't necessarily have to submit both. You could, it's not necessary. Just submit what you're requesting to be done. So if the termite inspection has certain things that need to be taken care of, fumigate it, then send that particular one. It also, when it comes to home inspection, right? If the home inspection has itemized items of things that you're asking, send that inspection report, right? Or even plumbing. Let's say there's a leaky plumbing issue, right? In the bathroom or the kitchen, wherever, right? You can use that as part of it, right? Because again, from a seller's point of view is they wanna make sure is how do I justify these amounts? And if you cannot justify, I'm not just going to give you $100,000, $20,000, or even $5,000. I need to see justification how you came to that amount, right? As a seller, I'm also going to do my due diligence, right, and investigations, and I'm going to talk to someone and say, hey, I got these items that I need repair. What are you going to charge to get this done? And what if that amount is a lot less? As long as it's a licensed, bonded contractor when it comes to big significant items, then you should be good. But it's all about communications, right? I'm going to communicate that with the buyer's agent saying, hey, my client has a licensed contractor that's going to do the work. Okay, and we'll warrant it and all that fun stuff. Remember, the buyer just needs to make sure that it is good to go. Okay, make sense? Thoughts, questions, or concerns? If the seller agrees and buyer signs off on the RR form, the identified contingencies are automatically removed with the buyer's signature. Okay, so not necessarily, but necessarily. I want to be crystal clear, right? When the request of repair is accepted by the seller, right? Part of the stipulation is that the seller will do these repairs in lieu of that you will commit to release physical inspection contingency. Okay, meaning that a seller will not do any of it until we have a signed agreement that you will release that as part of the condition. Now, I'm going to give you a scenario, and this is just again for your sake not to do. Okay. because it's gonna cost the seller and it's gonna cost you the potential listing. So the scenario was this. The buyer submitted a request of repairs and the seller ended up doing like $14,000 of repairs. The seller did it. One, the seller was a contractor who was selling the property. So not a problem. I can take care of a lot of this stuff, but it was $14,000 worth of stuff. The issue and the problem that transpired here is that the seller thinking, okay, they're requesting this, good to go. I'm going to do this so that way I don't have to worry as we get closer to closing this deal. The problem was that the buyer and the buyer agent never released that as a condition. And what ended up happening was that the seller did all of the work and then the buyer decided to cancel. And because the buyer canceled, right, and held on to their contingency, the buyer has rights. And ultimately, the buyer has the right to receive their full deposit. Now, the seller was very upset because the seller says, well, why did I do all of this request when the buyer didn't even perform after? So what ended up happening was that the seller was upset at the agent and ultimately lost the listing. Didn't give them the opportunity to relist or put the property back on the market because the seller was just upset. And that happens. So how do you avoid those circumstances and issues? Tell your seller not to do any of the repairs until the buyer has released any and all contingencies, not just physical inspection, folks, everything, loan, appraisal, seller disclosures, and all of the contingencies. Because now the buyer is in risk, right? The buyer is in risk of forfeiting their deposit up to 3%. Okay? So don't do the work. Well, a lot of the stuff is going to take longer than the time to close. Okay, I get it. I understand. Then you can extend the escrow to close at a later date. Okay, but no, under no circumstances, if the seller agrees to do any repairs, don't do it. That includes termite. Until the buyer has committed and has released any and all contingency, folks, because this may happen. Now, the argument here would have been simple too, right? The argument could have been, well, I did all of the work and therefore I'm going to be compensated from the buyer's deposit as damages. Now, that's a good claim. That's a really good claim, even though the buyer never released any and all contingencies. But if a buyer wants to fight, they're going to fight and they're going to go back to the facts of the black and white of the contract and say, I never released any of my contingencies. Therefore, per the contract, I have the right to exercise and cancel and retain my deposit. The seller's position is going to say, well, I disagree. I did it in good faith, all of your requests prior. Under my thought was that you were going to perform and close the deal. So there's an argument there as well. So what happens next? Well, if there's not a meeting of the mind when it comes to cancellation, because all of us should know that it has to be mutually canceled. Otherwise, we have a disagreement. There's options. And what are those options? Mediation,
Arbitration.
arbitration, or lawsuit. That's simple. Okay, mediation, arbitration, or lawsuit. Take them to small claims and sue them for the damages, right? For doing that. But remember, you have documentation, you have documents that stipulate the answers to what you need to do. Okay? It's your job to help navigate the buyer and the seller. Okay? And it's your job, if you are representing the seller, to instruct the seller, wait until we get official CR, contingency or removal of any and all. And once we receive it and I have a copy, go for it, Mr. Seller. Get working on all of these repairs. That's the appropriate way of doing it. I've seen it so many times and it's difficult because then there's a dispute. That's what we're trying to avoid. Does that make sense? All right, let me see a couple of chats here. So suggest to educate the buyer before submitting offers. The request for repairs is a negotiable item and it is not required, but the seller agrees to that request and it is our job as their agent to negotiate. Absolutely, Rosie, 100%. Wherein the RPA stipulates the property is sold and is as is. All right, if I have a few minutes after my presentation, I will show you where it's at. I have to also look for it, but it is on the RPA where it says property is sold and is as is. Does anyone know where it shows the sold as is? Okay.
7B is one section. that
Ah,
actually-
okay, look at 7B. Thank you, Rosie. Okay, she already put the work. So if you look under paragraph 7B of the RPA, the residential purchase agreement, it says there in bold, property sold in its as is condition. Okay, thank you, Rosie. She is my assistant, by the way. She is my assistant helping me today. Thank you, Rosie. Awesome. Okay, let's continue. So next slide. So how the seller can, on the request of repairs, right, respond with the RR if seller agrees to everything or nothing in the request. The seller can respond back on the request of sellers, excuse me, on the request of the repairs from the seller, agrees to do some or make any changes to the request, not respond, no to the request, but a response is, obviously appropriate. So as it says, the seller can be completely silent. I submit an offer, I submit my request of repairs, and I don't hear from the seller. Crickets. And now that 17-day is creeping up, and I still have not heard from our request of repairs. What should you do if you're the buyer's agent? 100%. Pick up the phone and call the seller or the listing agent, right? Hey, I'm just following up on our request for repairs. We haven't heard in the last 5 days. I want to make sure, one, you have it. Two, have you got a response back from the seller? Oh, geez, I didn't check my inbox. I was out for a while, so I'll check and then okay, that might stir up the momentum to get an answer. Okay, but what if the listing agent says, yeah, they haven't responded back? Okay. And now that 17 days is just almost there. You're on the 15, 16 day, and you know that you have to release that as part of the condition, but the buyer's not willing to release that as part of the condition because the seller has not agreed to any of the buyer's terms. What do? Well, there's options, right? Option one is ask for an extension of time to release that condition. Okay, form ETA. Two, back out of the deal. If you know that this is something that you want done and the seller has not responded to you, and you feel that the seller's not going to respond to you because originally they said property sold in its as-is condition, okay, the buyer can back out of that deal. And they're fine to back out of the deal. They're within their rights to do so. Does that make sense? Okay. So if they back out of the deal, okay, they're within their rights to do so. They're within their rights to do so. So those are a couple options. Or call back the listing agent and say, listen, hey, I know the seller said no to, they're not wanting to respond because they originally told me that they were selling the property in its as-is condition, but I'm just giving you one last shot. Or you can write it until the seller and the listing agent send you a notice to perform. Because they can send you a notice to perform 2 days prior to releasing that condition. So if it's 17 days that you release that condition, the listing agent can send you the CR form or the notice to perform on the 15th day. On the 15th day. Here's the notice to perform. And you're like, what are you talking about? The 15th day? We don't have to release that till the 17th day. I get it. But if you read the contract, it says that the seller can send you the notice to perform 2 days prior.
8 hours.
And that's a tactic that is used by savvy listing agents because they want you to remove that on the 17th day. We are in the mindset that we must send the notice to perform on the 17th day, which is true, but that allows the buyer 2 additional days to release that as a condition. So if you send it on the 17th day, they got 18, 19 to release that as a condition. So you're giving them two more days. So think strategy. If you're the listing agent, hold that thought, Jim. And I think, Rosie, you had a question too. Hold that thought. But imagine if you were the savvy listing agent and proactive, you already have some concerns with this buyer, right? So if you want to make sure that this buyer is going to perform, send the notice to perform. So what if the buyer agent gets pissed off at you? Because it probably will. What the hell are you sending me this notice to perform? We're going to perform, I know, but that's part of my process. That's what I do on all my transactions. So I just want to make sure that the buyer releases it on the 17th day. We don't want any delays. I need to make sure that this is tight on our conditions. Otherwise, if you're not going to perform, I get it, we need to cancel. Right? Because your job as a listing agent, now I'm flipping the tables a little bit, your job is to navigate this and get the deal closed or not waste time and find another buyer immediately so you can open escrow with someone else. Jimmy, question.
Okay, what if you? 7 days property is?
I'm not sure if I understand your question.
And what if you, what would you fix whatever they found?
Yeah, and that's
To cancel the deal and your bottom line is okay, if you're correct.
I get it. And that's the beauty and the dynamics is negotiations. If the seller is willing to provide you with credit, fix it or price reduction, then it's a win. Now the buyer's position is to either accept it or not accept it. But if you're going to throw something at the seller and you don't perform, that looks bad on you and the buyer's agent. Because this is what you're throwing at us. We agreed to, or a partial of that. Remember, it's negotiations, right? It's no different than when you submit an offer, counter offer 1, counter offer number 2, seller multiple, seller singles. This is the same component. Request of repairs, sellers respond to that request of repairs. It's back and forth like ping pong or tennis. We're just trying to iron it out where everyone is happy. Make sense? Beautiful, Jim. I think, Rosie, did you have a question?
Oh, no.
Okay. All right. Who else had a question here? Let's see. As it's better to request funds towards closing costs to avoid repair issues later. Absolutely. You know, in my opinion, as Rosie states, you know, it's best that you get the credit instead of the seller taking care of the repairs. But again, it really depends on what the scenario is, right? A simple water heater replacement, you know, it's not that big of a deal, then I would probably have the seller done. You know, one transaction I was involved in, the city came in and did a city inspection. And part of the city inspection was that they needed to put sod on the front yard. And so the listing agent reached out to me and said, hey, you know, the sellers are willing to put the sod as part of the condition that the city wants. What type of sod do you want? I said, what type of sod do I want? Okay, you know, I started thinking of what sod. And then I requested a certain, you know, type of grass, right? And the seller was willing to do so. So again, it's preference and how that's maneuvered, like typical, you know, water heaters, right? You know, there's different types of water heaters, right? Maybe the buyer's asking for a specific because they know that type of water heater. Again, it's preference, but again, does the seller have to abide by what the buyers want? Not necessarily. As long as it's a functional water heater that is doing its job, it doesn't matter what brand it is, right? You can put a request because maybe you have a history that this particular water heater will last longer than not a typical water heater. I don't know. But it's part of, again, part of that negotiations. Make sense? Okay. All right, let's continue. So how is the seller's response to the buyer's request work? So in 1A, list those repairs seller will not will not make. Seller agreement is conditional. Buyer must agree to remove and identify contingencies. Buyers may accept seller's response or counter terms in 1B or make a new request or repair. So let's just say that you submit a request, right? And that's request number one from the buyer, right? The seller responds back and says, look, I'm not gonna do this, and this, but I'm willing to do this. The buyer says, no, I'm not happy with that. A buyer has the option to send a second request of repairs, a third request of repairs. You can do as many requests as you want until you come to an agreement. Now, I would emphasize and stress, don't get too crazy, okay? And this is your job as a buyer's agent to really educate your client is, look, we don't want to go back and forth. You know, get to the bottom of what you want and what you're okay not having. Because if all this back and forth is going to get to the point where they're going to get upset, you're going to get upset, and it's not worth it. Okay, your job is to be able to have that conversation with the buyer. Just give me the items that are more important to you so we can address them as part of your concern. All the other stuff, you know, you can do as you live in the property, right? Maybe do this, do that. Doesn't necessarily have to be done all in one setting, right? Remember, houses can be improved, right? That's the beauty of real estate, is enhancing the windows, enhancing the doors, remodeling the kitchen, the bathrooms, right? You can do that. And what happens to the value of the home? Any improvements that you do to the home will definitely improve the value too, right? That's what investors do. Buyer's signature removes identified contingencies. No signature is needed on the contingency removal. Okay, so I'm going to address this and make it very clear, okay? Part of it, and a lot of this stuff is a little dated from CAR, but in essence is if you're sending a request of repairs, right, and it gets accepted, you still need to send out the contingency removal as part of the process, all right? That identifies and secures your position, but you also need the paper trail to make sure that everyone is on the same page. Seller obligated to make repairs. The answer is no, no. RPA paragraph 11, property is sold as is on the date. Again, disregard that. Date of acceptance, seller must repair damage to the property that occurs between date of acceptance and before close of escrow. Okay, so let me give you some scenarios here real quick. And I know we're kind of pressed for time, but if you need to go, by all means, I get it. It's a holiday weekend. But if you want to stick around, please stick around. Okay. So let's say your offer gets accepted today, right? Today is what, the 23rd, May of 23rd, right? It's a 30-day escrow, right? 2 weeks in, right? 2 weeks in, the listing agent calls you. Hey, Simon, we have an issue, right? And that issue is that, you know, on the second floor, on the ceiling, the drywall just collapsed because there was a pipe that ultimately had a pinch nose needle leak, and eventually the water and, you know, now the drywall. Now, we're 15 days into escrow. We only got 15 more days to close. Does the seller and the listing agent let it be because in 15 days it's still going to close? It'll be the buyer's responsibility. Hey, it's property sold in as is condition. Is that the buyer's responsibility or the seller's responsibility?
Sellers.
Negotiable item
Yeah,
to be the seller.
yeah, exactly. It's the seller's responsibility because I didn't submit an offer with a leaky ceiling. I made an offer that was still intact. So therefore, it's the seller's responsibility. The listing agent, the seller cannot say to me, well, the property's being sold as is. We told you it's been identified. Oh, well, it's your responsibility. No, it's not. I don't own the property. You need to fix it or we back out of this deal. That's simple. Make sense? Okay, so if something happens with an escrow, it's still the seller's responsibility. Okay? That has nothing to do with your request of repairs. That's a separate item, separate ticket. Anything that happens during, that still falls on the seller. Make sense? The seller's responsible. Number two, repair request by state and local law, points of sale, brace of water heater, retrofit slides and showers, doors. Okay, so all that is, again, part of it. If it's a safety hazard, okay, you walk into the house and you smell, gas, all right? The gas from, the gas company, right? And it's pretty significant, right? That's a concern. That's a safety hazard, right? Someone has to take care of it immediately because you don't take care of it, someone lights up something, that house is not gonna be there anymore, right? The deal's gonna fall apart or someone's gonna be severely hurt or killed, right? Common sense. It's the seller's responsibility. If you smell it, right? And let's just say, for example, folks, okay? And again, I apologize that I'm going over my time, but I think it's important. But let's just say that you released all contingencies, right? And you're 2 to 3 days out from recording, right? It's slam dunk, it's gonna happen. And you do your final verification walkthrough, your VP, you walk in and now you get this odor of gas and it's like, holy moly, we have a leak in here. What is your job and your responsibility if you're the buyer's agent? Okay, your job is to immediately call the listing agent, let them know that there's a gas leak to get the gas company out here to shut it off. Okay, and you're going to note it on your VP that there's a gas leak. Okay, now your job here, unfortunately, is either to get it extended to close until this thing is taken care of, because it's a safety issue, right? So your job is to say, look, we need to get this taken care of. Yeah, immediately. That's a seller's responsibility. So the seller will get a plumber out there, identify where the gas leak, or have the gas company come and find out where the gas leak is. And it may be a simple fix. It may be under the stove or in the back of the stove. And because of the gas line was forced and pushed and it tweaked it where it now has a pinch nose leak in there, and that's where the gas is coming out. And I've experienced that. I've experienced it myself. I would say, I had a condo in El Segundo and it's like, something smells like gas here, but it was a very, very tiny. And sure enough, we got the gas company and they did their test and they found out that it was under on the back of the wall. So we had to rip the wall and then replace the pipe, because there was a leak coming from there. But it was my responsibility. I had to take care of it. Okay. So just kind of understand those parameters. Property improvements may not be built to code in compliance with current law or have had any permits issued. No conditions must be disclosed to seller, but they are not required to be repairs. Okay, so remember the elements of properties that have additions that are permitted or not permitted. Okay, do your due diligence. Okay, a lot of sellers do not get permits to do home improvements. Okay, they do what they call homeowners improvements. They won't hire a licensed contractor because, one, it costs too much money, and they just get a handyman or someone that knows how to do it. Okay, remember, it's at your own risk, right? What you're buying. Okay. And understand that may in the future come back to haunt you if it's a city that's stringent in inspections, right? And if it wasn't up to par or without permits, that can come back to the buyer. And now the buyer may be responsible to bring it up to speed with permits. Okay, and that can be very costly. So know the situation in the scenario. And if the buyer is still willing to take on the responsibility, then it falls on them, document it, and make sure you get it signed and approved. Okay, so FHA and VAs are pretty much the same with special considerations. Repairs, conditions by seller may be required by the buyer's lender. Okay, that's why we use the FHA and the VA notice addendum. Buyer should determine seller's response before moving the contingency, otherwise lender may not fund the buyer, could be in breach. Okay, just because you release the contingency and now the lender comes back and says, hey, this is part of a condition, you were supposed to have this taken care of, and the seller says, nope, I'm not going to do it. Okay, you're still liable as a buyer. You may be in breach, and therefore you may forfeit your deposit. Okay. Evaluate repair request, material fact disclosed in the inspection report must be disclosed to the other prospective buyers. Okay, if the deal falls apart and you have all these inspections, right? Your job is now as a listing agent is to divulge all of that as part of the process. Okay, your job. Well, why should we provide all of these reports when we didn't do these inspections? That was the previous buyer. I get it. But if there's something there that is a big concern and a big red flag, it's your job as a listing agent to provide that. That's what causes litigations and lawsuit, folks. I'm telling you from personal experience. I know, doing this for a very long time, I'm always being sued. Okay, not me personally, but me as the broker being sued. It's not a good feeling. Okay, so you want to make sure that you know how to navigate this and be very transparent. Because I get a lot of questions and loopholes. Do we have to? Yeah, you have to. It's material fact. It's part of the process. I rather lose the deal than getting a deal that now will potentially cost me more than my commission. It's not worth your commission. No commission, in my opinion. But you may see it differently.
Years ago.
Yeah, exactly. I like what Rosie said, listen to Simon. Simon says, right? Alternative to making repairs, enable the buyer to ask for repairs or credit price reduction, or all seller may offer a credit or a reduction in price in lieu of making repairs. Repairs of conditions by seller may be required by buyer's lenders. If the lender disallows the credit, the lender decision must be respected and the credit will not be paid. Solution is, hold on, let me move this little tab here. Credit will not be paid. Solution, ask the lender about maximum credit allowance. And again, just going back and recapping is, you want to be diligent in your approach and ask the lender, hey, how much credit can we get? Because that's going to be part of the process. And if they said maximum is $8,000 and you're asking for 15,000, well, again, you're probably going to lose the difference. Again, as I stated earlier, part of the segue and how you can maneuver this is credit this 8,000. Part of this is reduce the purchase price, and part of the remainder can be the what do you call it? The buy down of the rate. Use that money to buy down the rate. If it's a 7% interest, but if you put $5,000 into buying the rate, now your rate can be 6.5%. I don't know. I'm just saying as an example, right? So look at all elements of it, but also be very realistic in your approach. Okay. All right. And then final, if you have any additional questions, you can always go to the California Association of Realtors, legal Q&A, requests or repairs. There's a short video that you can also watch if you're interested in watching. Again, all of the information is through CAR. And that pretty much concludes today's class. Any final thoughts, questions, or concerns? Okay. Well, I appreciate all of you. Thank you very much for hanging in there. I apologize for going, 10 minutes over my time, but I hope this information was of value. If you have any questions for me, you can always reach out to me at any time. Please enjoy and have a safe holiday weekend, and I'll see you on the next contract class. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you, Simon.
Thank
Happy
you.
Memorial.